Good morning, DFC, and welcome back to another lesson in ENG3C. That's grade 11 English. Today, our lesson is on dramatic literature, and we're going to learn how to understand and analyze the elements of dramatic plays as a form of fiction. So, in other words, we're going to teach you guys a bit about dramatic literature or plays, and then we're going to look at a very short and simple one, but it's a classic. And so dramatic literature is the oldest form of storytelling. The idea of people acting out plays and stories in person has been around for hundreds and thousands of years. And the reason why it's so old is that for much of history, if you look at this chart here, let's go back to the year 1475. If you look at that year, much of the world simply didn't know how to read. Literacy rates were below 20%, and that's regardless of language. And even if you jump to the year 1800, the world literacy rate was about 15%. And then eventually it jumps up over 80%, but combined, the world is not very literate until the invention of the printing press and public education systems throughout the world. That's where you see this big skyrocketing. So the printing press is invented in the 15th century. Then after its adoption, the printing press is basically a really ancient photocopier. It allowed text to be printed quickly and cheaply. Before the printing press, books were made by hand. Every book was made by hand, written out by people called scribes. So scribes would write one book, then write the next by hand. It's a very slow and inefficient way of making books, and therefore books were quite expensive. And they were simply reserved for the ruling class, people who were in charge, had power, and were wealthy. So the top 1%, or I should say the top 10%, were able to learn how to read and have books. For everyone else, they were simply working jobs or working in fields simply because they had to do whatever they need to do to survive. But over time, public education systems were created by governments like Canada. So Canada came into existence in 1867. And our literacy rate actually mirrors the American literacy rate. So it starts off high and it stays high. Canada's literacy rate is currently 99%, meaning that only 1% of Canadians can't read or write in any language. So even though most people know how to read today, over 80% throughout the world, regardless of whatever language that they speak or read, most people can read and write, but plays still exist because people still enjoy seeing stories played out in real time. And obviously, the pandemic has thrown that into a loop, but before the pandemic, and even after, once this is all over eventually, we'll get back to enjoying plays. But just know that plays were a means of people learning about stories without being able to read or write. You're watching the people act out that play right in front of you. Okay, so let's get into today's activity. Normally, I do this play in a class, but we can't really do that this year due to the pandemic. But I'd just like you in task 1 to describe the things that we can do if we were to perform this play today. So if you were to perform a play in a classroom, what things should you do when performing the play to make sure that it goes well? Maybe you speak loudly and clearly, you give each person a speaking part. Maybe you have some props, or maybe you just make sure to remember your lines or remember who is speaking when. But just tell me some things that you could do to make sure that if you were to perform this play, that it would go well. So that's task 1. Task 2 is normally we read this as a class. People get assigned parts and we just speak those parts in turn according to the script. But this year, I just want you to read the script of a play called The Monkey's Paw. It's a very quick story, but also very famous. So famous, in fact, that The Simpsons did a parody of it, or an adaptation of it, in one of their Treehouse of Horror episodes. So task 3 is about an adaptation. An adaptation is where you take work in one medium, like a novel, play, or video game, and make it into another medium. Say, a movie based on a video game, or a movie based on a book. So for example, The Walking Dead was originally a graphic novel, but they made it into a TV show, and they've made video games about it as well. So what I'd like you to do is watch the Simpsons episode here, and then on the next page, or on this page, choose either the original text or the Simpsons adaptation of the story, and then identify the plot and storytelling elements. So this is a review of activity 2.2. And then I'd like you to tell me which version tells the better story. Is it the text or the Simpsons episode? And be sure to just explain your answer. And then I'd like you to imagine that you're a film director looking to adapt this play into a blockbuster film. So what actors and actresses would you hire for those parts? So who'd be the narrator? Herbert White, Mr. White, Sergeant Morris, Mrs. White, and the stranger. Who would you hire or cast as those actors? Then tell me, what are some 3 settings or locations that you'd film? And then what are 3 props or items that you like to tell the story? Next, I'd like you to, and this is a potential portfolio item. I'll write that in. Potential portfolio item. I'd like you to think of a recent event or story that you've experienced, and in the space provided, tell that story as if it were being performed in a play, complete with dialogue, characters, and stage direction. Your short scene doesn't need to fill up the whole space provided, but it should be long enough to have a definite plot. So just like The Monkey's Paw is told in a script form, we have so you have who is talking right here, and then what they say is here, and then it switches from character to character. So this is called dialogue. So what Sergeant Morris is saying here, that's called dialogue. And if you notice, we have words in brackets and italics. Italics are just slanted words. Those are called stage directions. So this is what the actor would do. He would look hard at Herbert. He'd say, I have, and then he would turn pale at the thought. So these are called stage directions, and you can have those in your play as well. And I've given you an example of what stage directions can look like as well. So in this example, I have my character Brandon, and his dialogue is, all right, class, today we're going to learn about dramatic literature. Then I glare menacingly at the students who dare to show up late to class, because that's a big pet peeve of mine. So that's called stage direction. So for example, welcome everyone to ENG3C. So that'd be my character and my dialogue. My stage direction is, the class looks at him with apathy. Apathy is just feelings of uncaring. Well, that wasn't the response I was looking for. And then you could, maybe there's a character named Jimmy. Mr. Brandon. What's the point of being here? It's Saturday. So continue, tell whatever story that you want, but just tell it in the form of a play. And as usual, I'd like you to give yourself a mark out of 0 to 4 for how well you meet today's learning goal. And if you complete all 4 tasks, you'll get a 4 out of 4. I've been really impressed with the work that's been handed in so far, so just please keep up that work. And if you have any questions, Kyle and I will be available every morning in Google Meet. So in other words, take care, everyone. Thanks again for tuning in and have a good day. Bye.